Welcome to the Risk Wheelhouse, the podcast where we navigate the ever-changing seas of risk management and technology. Join your hosts, Ori Wellington and Sam Jones, as they steer you through the latest trends, insights, and strategies shaping the future of integrated risk management. Ready to chart a course towards success? Hop aboard and let's set sail into today's deep dive.
Okay, let's unpack this. We are looking today at a piece of research, a technical announcement that, on the surface, looked like it was just about faster microchips.
Yeah, denser data centers, that kind of thing.
Exactly. But for those of us focused on enterprise risk, what NVIDIA published following CES 2026 is, in reality, a significant blueprint. It's almost a mandate, really, for how executive teams need to plan for the future of risk management. So today we're doing a deep dive into what that signal means for autonomous integrated risk management, or autonomous IRM.
That is the absolute perfect way to frame this. The perception, it might be that this is just another hardware cycle announcement, a faster GPU, a denser rack.
The usual stuff.
Usual stuff. But for anyone running a serious risk or compliance program, it instantly changes the fundamental economics of assurance. The research is very clear on this.
So what's the shift?
The limiting factor for building truly autonomous risk systems is shifting away from, raw compute affordability. That battle, the pure ability to run a big model, is largely won, or at least it's being rapidly neutralized by hardware advancements like this new Rubin platform.
So the core technical constraint has really moved. We're not asking if we can build the AI to find the risk anymore.
Not at all.
We're asking if we can build the reliable, auditable, and scalable infrastructure to manage the AI that's finding the risk.
And most critically, proving it did its job correctly.
Right. Consistently and within policy bounds.
Precisely. And that emphasis on proving it did its job is really the heart of the matter here. We have to start with a clear definition.
Okay.
When we talk about autonomous IRM, we are moving way past mere automation. We are talking about continuous AI-enabled loops with bounded execution and, critically, audit-grade evidence.
So it's not just doing the task, it's documenting the task perfectly.
It's automated, it's self-regulating, and it's self-documenting risk processes that execute actions, but only within predefined policy constraints.
And for context, for the risk managers and executives listening who track the trajectory of risk maturity, we often talk about the IRM navigator curve. Where does a technical shift of this magnitude push organizations on that scale?
It acts like a massive accelerant. It pushes organizations squarely into the autonomous phase.
Yeah.
If you look at that, foundational, coordinated, embedded, extended, and then finally autonomous, this hardware shift makes that autonomous phase widely feasible across the whole enterprise, not just in isolated security use cases.
But it's democratizing that top tier of maturity.
It is. We're moving beyond just embedded controls, which are built into processes, and extended scope, which covers more domains. We're moving into systems that can govern themselves, execute mitigation, and generate evidence continuously.
So what are the practical changes?
I'd say they're threefold. First, the risk cadence shifts from periodic to continuous. Second, the scope expands dramatically to embrace simulation-driven operational resilience. And third, executive expectations rise significantly for decision provenance. You absolutely have to prove how the agent decided what it decided, every single time.
That's a huge mandate. Let's start with the hard economics that underpin this entire shift, because, economics dictates what's actually feasible.
Always.
Signal one from the announcement focused heavily on token economics. NVIDIA positioned their new platform, Rubin, as this extreme co-designed 6-chip AI platform, and the language explicitly claimed radical reductions in token generation costs.
It was a very deliberate positioning. They're trying to move AI from an expensive, almost aspirational research endeavor to an enterprise utility with predictable operational costs. They are, in effect, commoditizing the unit of reasoning.
Okay, but help us connect that dot for risk management. Why does the cost of inference, so running the models, not the initial training, why does that matter so much for risk and compliance assurance specifically?
Because autonomous IRM is profoundly inference heavy. Just think about the workload profile for a minute. An autonomous risk system isn't sitting around retraining a massive model all day. That's not its job. Its job is running persistent reasoning and verification loops. It's constantly polling, comparing, validating.
That's always on.
It's always on. It's analyzing constant enterprise inputs. New user signals, new system configurations, continuous evidence refresh, new exceptions, validation results from control checks, and it's comparing all of this against the known policy base. This is a perpetual load.
And that used to be prohibitively expensive.
Exactly. The cost of running those verification loops continuously across thousands of controls and millions of data points has historically been the gating factor.
So if running a comprehensive risk check every 5 minutes costs, say, $50, the business case is weak.
Right.
But if the cost of generating that token, that unit of reasoning, drops by 70%, that same continuous check suddenly costs $15, that is a fundamental change.
It is. I mean, if you monetize those performance gains, suddenly the business case for continuous monitoring, which was previously deemed too expensive or too taxing on IT resources for anything but the highest criticality items.
It just opens up to everything else.
It opens up widely. This is the core implication. Organizations can now shift from the necessary evil of periodic risk analysis, the quarterly sampling, the annual audit creep cycle, toward genuine continuous risk operations.
And the consequence of that speed is exponential, isn't it? I mean, it's not just a linear improvement.
Absolutely. The verification loops can now run frequently enough to detect control drift and degradation in hours or even minutes, rather than waiting for the next audit cycle.
Or a quarterly report.
Right. This transformation changes risk from a historical reporting function to a real-time operational function.
But I have to push back here a little. A faster chip is useless if you still run your old, slow processes. If the verification cadence increases by a factor of 10, won't we just flood our human analysts with 10 times the number of alerts?
A critical question.
Are we just trading expensive compute for expensive human time?
That's a huge challenge, and it means the program design has to shift radically. You have to treat always-on verification as a new operating layer entirely. It's not just an analytics enhancement you bolt onto your existing GRC tool.
So what's different about this layer?
The intelligence isn't just detecting the anomaly. It's automatically enriching the exception before it ever touches a human analyst. The autonomous system gathers the inputs.
All the context.
Exactly, all the context, the policy references, the historical context of that potential exception.
So the human analyst's job completely changes. They stop being an evidence collector, spending 80% of their time compiling data.
Right, and they become a decision maker.
Spending 100% of their time on exceptions that are already enriched.
Precisely. And to make this concrete, let's look at the example the research highlighted. Privileged access continuous validation. What does continuous actually look like in practice for something as common and as high risk as managing privileged accounts?
Yeah, traditionally, this is a quarterly affair. You pull reports from your identity management systems, maybe you sample 50 privileged accounts, manually compare them against a policy document.
And it's all snapshot in time, right? It's already out of date the minute you pull the report.
Exactly.
The continuous approach is fundamentally different. Instead of that quarterly sampling, the system is continuously validating a defined, granular control set in near real time.
So what's it looking for?
It's always checking specific high-risk conditions. Not just static privileged role assignments, but dynamic events. Things like MFA enforcement across those roles for every single login, unusual break glass usage alerts, and real-time change approvals for high-risk configurations in your core infrastructure.
And if a policy is violated, what happens in that moment?
The moment a policy is violated or a configuration drifts, the evidence is refreshed immediately. The exception is flagged, and the associated ticketing system is automatically enriched with all the necessary context.
So the ticket comes with the evidence attached.
It comes with the exact configuration change, the timestamp, the role identity, the specific policy section that was breached, all of it before it's ever escalated to a human. The human arrives at a pre-compiled case file, not a raw alert.
That's a measurable gain in both efficiency and security. For executives tasked with buying this kind of capability, what is the measurable proof point of success here? What should they be looking for?
It's twofold. First, the documented reduction in the evidence refresh cycle time for your priority controls. If it took 2 weeks to gather evidence for a quarter and now it takes 2 hours,
That's an easy win to show the board.
it is. But the more profound metric is the automated evidence coverage rate. The percentage of required evidence that's collected and validated without any manual intervention. If you're aiming for 90% coverage without a human touch, that proves you are achieving assurance via continuous operations, not just faster manual reporting.
Okay, so the economic barrier to continuous verification is collapsing. But if these continuous agents are now cheap to run, the next logical question is, where do they actually live, and how do we manage them when they start taking action?
Exactly.
This leads us to signal 2 from the research. Agent loops are becoming an infrastructure workload, not just some application feature. The new system is described as a coherent, rack-scale architecture spanning GPU, CPU, networking, and data processing units, or DPUs. And you mentioned the new Vera CPUs are highlighted as being engineered for data movement and agentic processing.
That engineering distinction is the absolute crux of the infrastructure shift. When a major hardware vendor designs a CPU specifically for agentic processing, it tells the market that agents, these multi-step, reasoning, action-oriented loops, are no longer a novelty.
They're not a side project anymore.
Not at all. They are viewed as a durable, scaled, foundational workload, just like a database or a virtualization layer. They are infrastructure now.
So if agents are infrastructure, what are the new requirements that risk architecture teams need to start worrying about right now?
Reliability and integration become paramount. They move even ahead of raw performance. Agentic risk management is not just about the model inference, it's about reliable execution.
What does that mean in practice?
Well, an agent needs to manage its state across multiple steps, perform retrieval-augmented generation correctly, handle complex tool calling, execute long workflows, and most challenging of all, reliably route across all these diverse enterprise systems.
So your foundational systems, your ticketing system, your identity platform, your asset inventory like a CMDB, your security tools.
Your EDR, your core financial systems, all of it. The agent has to consistently and correctly talk to 20 different complex systems and manage the state of the conversation across all of them.
For instance, pulling a user ID from the IAM system, checking a configuration in the CMDB, and then opening a ticket in Jira, all is one logical step.
Exactly. And if one of those systems is down or responds with an unexpected error, the agent has to be designed to pause, log the failure, manage its state, and potentially roll back the partially executed steps.
These are complex reliability problems first.
They're multivariable reliability and integration problems first, and AI problems second.
The implication for autonomous IRM is then pretty clear. The infrastructure stack has to be tuned for this multi-step autonomy that executes actions predictably and at massive scale, all under strict management controls.
What's the practical operating model takeaway for the executive listener?
The takeaway is that your architecture has to treat the agent runtime as a durable, policy-managed, logged, testable, and most importantly, reversible layer.
Reversible, that sounds critical.
It's non-negotiable.
Yeah.
If an autonomous agent executes a remediation action, say it decides to revoke a privilege or change a firewall rule, and that action causes an unintended system outage, you need clear auditability and the immediate ability to revert the action reliably.
Especially for high-stakes risk and financial controls. Absolutely. That reversibility is non-negotiable there.
But that reversibility requirement,
Yeah.
it immediately sounds like a massive governance headache.
Yeah.
If the system is making decisions continuously, how do you manage and audit all those disparate autonomous workloads across the enterprise?
That is the core problem, and it necessitates the implementation of what we call an agent control plane.
A control plane.
Think of it as the mandatory enterprise traffic cop for all your autonomous workloads. It's a dedicated management layer, totally vendor agnostic, that enforces standardization for agent identity, permissions, tool access, logging, evaluation, and rollback.
So without that central control plane.
Without it, autonomy will become chaos. It will lead to agent sprawl, which we can definitely talk about more later.
So the measurable proof point here is all about traceability. It's the ability to reconstruct the system's thought process.
Absolutely. For the buyer, the critical measurable proof point is the requirement for reproducible execution traces for every single agent action. This trace must include the inputs provided, the retrieved policy context the agent reasoned upon, the specific enterprise tools it invoked.
Any human approvals in the loop?
Any human approvals applied during the workflow? Yes. And the final outputs produced. You need centralized logs and replay capability, especially for defined high-impact risk workflows. If you can't fully replay the agent's decision-making process, you can't audit it.
Yeah, if you can't audit it, you can't trust it.
You can't trust it. Simple as that.
Okay, that gives us a framework for centralized control. But let's introduce the complexity of the modern enterprise. Signal 5 from the Post introduced this concept of hybrid autonomy.
Right.
They showed personalized AI agents running locally on specialized equipment and heavily emphasizing local execution and model routing. So why can't we just centralize all of this autonomous risk management in the main cloud data center? Why do we need hybrid autonomy?
Pure centralization fails on 3 fronts that are absolutely crucial for risk management. First is latency.
Speed.
Right. Some decisions, especially in real-time operational or security risk scenarios, like an automated denial of a rapidly spreading threat, require extremely low latency that a centralized model across the globe simply can't guarantee.
Okay, what's the second front?
Second is data minimization and sovereignty. For privacy regulations like GDPR or for national sovereignty reasons, highly sensitive data in regulated geographies often cannot be shipped to a centralized cloud for processing. The analysis has to happen where the data resides.
And the third?
Third is resilience. Risk systems, particularly those governing operational resilience, need to function even when global connectivity is degraded or lost entirely. You can't have your safety systems go offline because the network link is down.
So the practical result for autonomous IRM is that the target state is inherently hybrid. It has to be.
It has to be. We need centralized intelligence for policy setting, for global model training and oversight. But localized execution is mandatory for sensitive domains, for business continuity, and for those low-latency critical actions.
That's a huge design consequence for architects.
It is. Architects must plan for robust policy distribution, rigorous agent identity verification at the edge, and technical attestation of local runs. You have to ensure consistent controls and telemetry enforcement, even when the agent is running on specialized local hardware or an edge device that's disconnected from the main data center.
This sounds like auditing a large distributed factory. The factory manager sets the global standard, but the local shop floor foreman has to prove he adhered to that standard using his local tools.
That's a perfect analogy. And the measurable proof point for that capability is simple but difficult to achieve. You must demonstrate consistent telemetry and management control enforcement across both centralized and local environments.
And you have to test it.
You have to validate it via audit logs in disconnected or degraded test scenarios. The critical test is, can you prove the agent running on the factory floor adhered to the global policy, even if it couldn't talk to the cloud for 30 minutes? That is the litmus test of trustworthy hybrid autonomy.
Okay, so here's where it gets really interesting, moving on to signal 3. The inference context memory storage platform. We've established that inference is cheaper, agents are now infrastructure. Now we need to talk about what the agent remembers when it makes a decision. This new dedicated memory tier boosts long context inference and performance. Sam, why is long context vital not just for a good AI answer, but specifically for auditability and compliance?
Well, long context reasoning is not a niche performance feature in the world of assurance. It is utterly foundational. Risk decisions are rarely simple lookups. They require connecting dozens, sometimes hundreds of disparate data points across various systems and timelines. Long context is the capability that enables the critical end-to-end linkage needed for truly audit-ready narratives. Think of it as the agent having a perfect, immediate memory of its entire workflow leading up to a decision.
Can you give us a detailed example of that linkage across the whole assurance chain?
Sure. Imagine a regulatory change mandates new controls for data access. The auditor, or the system itself, needs to be able to instantly trace the decision provenance across the entire chain.
End to end.
End to end. That means demonstrating the linkage from the high-level regulatory policy to the specific procedure implemented to address it, to the granular control put in place, like a specific firewall or IAM rule, and then to the continuous evidence that proves the control worked and continues to work.
And it has to manage the exceptions, too. That's always the tricky part.
Exactly. It must include traceability across exceptions, showing why a certain exception was allowed for a specific user or scenario, and which compensating controls were automatically triggered in place of the primary control.
So it's about the full story.
It's about reconstructing the entire narrative, connecting the initial signals, the trigger event, the executed autonomous actions, and the final audited outcome. If the system forgets the specific policy, the exception, and the compensating control all in one contextual window, you cannot generate a complete defensible evidence pack. It becomes fragmented and unverifiable.
So if this performance becomes materially faster and cheaper, as the announcement suggests, the implication for autonomous IRM is that persistent, continuous assurance with full context becomes feasible for the majority of risk workflows.
Even the highly complex ones, yes.
We can finally link that high-level GRC data to the low-level operational data seamlessly.
Absolutely. But this is the classic double-edged sword moment in technology. While it technically enables far better assurance, it raises auditor and board expectations immediately and dramatically.
The bar gets higher.
The bar gets much higher. Boards and internal audit teams will no longer accept fragmented evidence or sampled data. They will demand that the autonomous system can reconstruct decisions end-to-end, linking every input to every output, especially when those autonomous actions involve material risk like financial reporting, compliance reporting, or systems access.
Which brings us to the crucial caution from the research. Persisted context expands the assurance surface area.
Yes.
If we have a perfect cheap memory of everything the system did and referenced, aren't we just creating massive legal and privacy exposure? What are the non-technical hurdles this increased memory creates that risk managers have to address right now?
This is arguably the most significant governance challenge presented by this new architecture. Persisting massive amounts of rich context dramatically increases requirements in 4 specific areas that risk managers must address immediately.
Okay, what's the first one?
First, retention boundaries. You are now collecting context, not just final data points. How long do you legally and functionally need to hold on to all the contextual data that supported a decision? Retention policies need to be granular for context data versus outcome data.
And then there's access to that deep data.
That's second, robust access controls. If the context memory is rich enough to reconstruct every step of an autonomous financial decision, including, say, referenced internal forecasts or specific employee communications, who has the right to view it? This requires a new layer of access control designed specifically for contextual memory.
And privacy.
Third, privacy constraints. Context often contains PII, sensitive employee data, or regulated information that was used in the reasoning process. This context has to be masked, secured, and localized based on global regulations like GDPR or CCPO.
And the fourth area you mentioned, legal holds, that seems particularly dangerous.
It is. Fourth is legal holds. If litigation occurs, the amount of data subject to legal hold just explodes because the context includes all the internal documents, data points, and policy snippets the agent referenced, not just the final output. You must have a robust, immediate way to put highly granular legal holds on specific segments of that contextual memory.
And underlying all of this is the need for demonstrable provenance.
Yes.
It's not enough to show what the agent decided. You have to verify what the agent knew, the specific version of the policy it referenced, the data it accessed at the exact moment it made the choice. That level of verifiable history becomes a hard requirement for defensibility.
Exactly. And the buyer proof point here is decision provenance completeness. The ability to reconstruct any agent decision with a standardized system-generated evidence pack.
And what's in that pack?
That pack must contain the original context sources, the policy constraints applied, any necessary human approvals, the precise actions executed, and the post-action verification that the action was successful. And this capability must be stress-tested via internal audit sampling. The auditors must be able to randomly pick a decision from 6 months ago and have the system prove its work instantly.
Let's talk about Signal 4 then. Open models and physical AI.
Right.
NVIDIA is positioning a whole portfolio of open models, Nematron for reasoning, Cosmos for simulation, Alpamayo for autonomous driving, all paired with open simulation tooling. We're seeing validation move out of the specialized lab and into a core assurance capability for the enterprise.
This is a huge trend. The framing of physical AI reinforces the idea that if AI is going to interact with the real world, whether that's controlling a factory floor or autonomously changing a security policy, it has to be validated with the same rigor we use in high-stakes engineering domains.
Like aerospace or automotive design.
Exactly.
So why is simulation moving from a specialized, complex discipline to a core assurance capability for risk management? Why can't we just rely on continuous monitoring in the real world?
Because the most material, high-impact failures in risk management live in the long tail. They aren't the routine, repeatable errors that continuous monitoring catches easily.
They're the weird edge cases.
They're the compounding scenarios, the complex exception paths, the hidden dependencies where controls degrade silently over time or interact with each other in unexpected ways. If you look at high-stakes autonomy, like self-driving systems, they rely on billions of miles of simulation and replayable testing before they are ever trusted at scale in the real world.
And that standard of proof is now coming for enterprise risk.
It is. It's coming for operational resilience.
So we are essentially accelerating the digital twin for risk pattern.
Yes. The autonomous IRM implication is that simulation becomes mainstream for operational resilience and compounding risk testing. This digital twin. It's not a copy of your IT network, it's a copy of your control relationships and your operational dependencies.
And what does that let you do?
This twin allows for continuous scenario generation, stress testing of controls against complex inputs, and resilience drills that mirror real-world chaos, but without the cost or disruption of a real-world exercise.
And the key capability, which you mentioned, is that the validation must be replayable after control changes. Tell us more about that.
It's the only way to establish confidence in change management. If you update a policy, modify a control, or change a system dependency, you must be able to rerun the exact stressful simulated scenario from 6 months ago, that compounding failure that almost took you down.
And prove the new control holds up.
And prove that the new control handles it correctly, generating the necessary evidence pack as output. This provides confidence that control changes don't inadvertently create new long-tail vulnerabilities that only emerge under extreme stress.
So simulation is moving from a periodic executive exercise, like a yearly disaster recovery drill that takes weeks to plan,
Right.
to a continuous software-defined control that validates resilience on demand.
Exactly. And the measurable proof point for the executive listener here is establishing a comprehensive scenario library that's mapped directly to your organization's top resilience exposures and compounding risks. The proof point is the documentation of your replay cadence. How often do you stress test the entire system?
And the thresholds.
The definition of measurable outcome thresholds. What is the acceptable degradation before intervention? And critically, the retained evidence outputs, which must be reviewable by internal audit. The auditor is now checking the integrity of your test suite, not just your production systems.
Okay, so we've covered the 4 main signals: cheaper inference, agents as infrastructure, long context for auditability, and simulation for validation. Let's connect these technical shifts directly to the functional structure of autonomous IRM, using the 5 essential layers that define a comprehensive program.
This is how executives should structure their strategic alignment. The 5 layers: strategic oversight, business orchestration, threat intelligence and validation, remediation and response, and verification and audit. They must all incorporate these new capabilities into their design.
All right, starting at the top, strategic oversight. How does this shift affect the boardroom view?
For layer 1, strategic oversight, the lower inference costs and the persistent context significantly increase the feasibility of maintaining a constant, verifiable linkage between objectives, risk appetite, exposure signals, and mitigation outcomes.
So instead of waiting for a quarterly report to see if you are operating within appetite.
This system can continuously measure breaches in real time, providing genuine, immediate visibility that was previously impossible. This changes the tenor of board-level risk discussions, from historical reporting to forward-looking operational control.
Next, layer 2.
Are you ready to see risk management in action? At Wheelhouse Advisors, we've launched a new YouTube channel dedicated to integrated risk management. You'll find quick explainers, insights from our IRM Navigator research reports, highlights from the Risk Journal, and conversations from the Risk Wheelhouse podcast. We're covering the topics that matter most to executives and risk leaders, from AI governance and cyber insurance to operational resilience and regulatory change. Every video is designed to help you anticipate risks, adapt with confidence, and build resilience in a digital-first world. In our first video, we explain how ISO 42001, the EU AI Act, and the NIST AI Risk Management Framework can work together as a unified playbook for AI risk. Subscribe today at youtube.com/@wheelhouseadv and get the latest insights delivered directly to you. That's youtube.com/@wheelhouseadv. Subscribe now and stay ahead of the risks that matter most.
Business orchestration. This sounds like the home of that agent control plane you mentioned.
It is. Layer 2. Business orchestration is where the agent loop-oriented platform design becomes mandatory. It supports reliable signal routing across complex, disparate systems and functions, ensuring predictable, stateful workflow execution under strict, auditable management controls. This layer manages the hybrid reality, ensuring centralized policy is enforced on local execution environments and dealing with failover and reversibility.
Okay, layer 3 deals with intelligence and validation.
Layer 3. Threat intelligence and validation is fundamentally changed by the simulation-first approach we just talked about. Simulation-first autonomy autonomy translates directly into replayable control stress testing and resilience validation, enabled by those long-tail scenario libraries.
So you can be proactive.
You can ingest new threat intelligence, say a novel attack vector, and proactively test it against your existing simulated environment to validate resilience before the threat ever hits production.
Then layer 4, remediation and response. This is where the continuous cadence really pays off.
Absolutely. In layer 4, remediation and response, the higher frequency, inference-enabled agent loops enable immediate triage, automated ticket enrichment with full context, and semi-automated mitigation actions.
But the key here is that speed has to be controlled.
It has to be. These actions are always bounded by necessary human approval gates and robust rollback design. An agent can prep the entire mitigation plan in seconds, but a human still has the veto power at critical decision points, with the autonomous system capturing the complete decision provenance.
And finally, the layer that ties back to our earlier discussion on context memory, verification and audit.
For layer 5, verification and audit, context memory makes the rich evidence narratives vastly more feasible. However, this technical enablement dramatically raises the bar. The expectation is immediately higher for reproducibility. Can you run the same query today and get the exact same result as 3 months ago?
You need rigorous retention policies.
You do. And above all, demonstrable decision provenance, the ability to fully unpack an autonomous decision for an auditor, showing inputs, constraints, policy version, and action taken. This is where the technical capability meets the legal and compliance reality, and failure here invalidates the entire system.
Given these systemic implications, executives cannot afford to wait and see. We need to focus on 2 distinct near-term risks that arise directly from these technological shifts, and then 3 specific testable actions to take right now. Let's start with the risk forecast for the next 12 to 24 months.
As inference economics improve and the barrier to entry drops, adoption will inevitably accelerate rapidly, and it will often outpace the organization's ability to govern it effectively.
So it's the predicted risk event in that time frame.
The predicted risk event for the next 12 to 24 months is agent sprawl. It creates inconsistent control behavior across business units and tools. We put the probability of this at around 40%.
And what's the core issue there?
The core issue is that because AI tooling and cheap inference are now readily available, every business unit, from finance to operations to HR, will begin deploying specialized agents for quick automation wins specific to their domain.
And without standardized management controls.
Enforced globally, these disparate deployments will quickly outpace oversight for identity, permissions, logging, evaluation, and rollback.
So you end up with 3 different agents applying 3 subtly different security policies to the same resource, leading to unpredictable system behavior and gaping control flaws.
Exactly. It results in a patchwork of controls that are unreliable and unpredictable, and it undermines the entire concept of integrated risk management.
So what's the strategic change to counter that?
It's mandatory. Implement an agent control plane. This is the non-negotiable enterprise management layer that standardizes agent identity, permissions, tool access, logging, evaluation, and rollback across all autonomous workloads, both centralized and local. It ensures consistency, visibility, and unified control over autonomous action before the sprawl accelerates further.
Okay. And the risk event further out, say 18 to 36 months. This deals with the rising bar for assurance.
This forecast addresses assurance expectations, especially around operational resilience. The predicted risk event for 18 to 36 months is that assurance expectations will shift aggressively towards simulation-based validation for critical resilience scenarios. We assign this a 30% probability.
Why that shift?
Because simulation-driven autonomy becomes mainstream and provably rigorous in adjacent areas like autonomous driving, boards and external auditors will increasingly ask why high-stakes operational resilience validation remains dominated by periodic, often subjective, paper-based exercises.
Instead of rigorous, replayable, evidence-generating simulation.
Right. Your annual DR drill documentation will no longer suffice if a rigorous continuous simulation alternative exists.
So what's the required strategic change there?
To formalize simulation-based assurance controls. This means developing documented scenario libraries for compounding risks, establishing a firm, measurable test cadence, defining clear outcome thresholds, like maximum allowable data loss, and critically, retaining evidence packs from the simulations as formal assurance artifacts that internal and external auditors can review and rely upon.
That sets the stage for the next few years.
Yeah.
Now, let's leave the listener with exactly 3 testable actions they can implement in their IRM planning process immediately. Based on all this.
Action 1 has to focus on monetizing the new economics we discussed at the start.
Okay, action 1, Treat inference economics as a first-order design variable. Stop asking, can we afford to monitor this, and start asking, what is the continuous verification cadence we need for compliance?
And get specific.
Establish an aggressive verification cadence target. Not just monitor daily, but monitor every 15 minutes for your priority controls and high-risk domains. Then, map that aggressive cadence to your current compute and workflow capacity to identify the immediate gaps. This forces you to monetize the performance gains and build the case for investment.
Action 2 must address that urgent governance risk of agent sprawl before it becomes unmanageable.
Action 2. Standardize management controls before scaling agents. You need to establish the agent control plane framework now, even if you only have 3 autonomous workflows.
Don't wait.
This means identity management for agents, the permissions structure, clear tool boundaries, what can the agent touch, centralized logging, standardized evaluation metrics, reproducibility requirements, and explicit rollback mechanisms must be designed and enforced up front. You have to establish that foundational layer of trust before you turn up the dial on speed.
And our final action links back to the long tail risk and that assurance shift we talked about.
Action 3. Operationalize simulation as assurance. Stop treating simulation as an interesting one-off project or a compliance check. Build those scenario libraries for compounding risks, define objective outcome thresholds, and ensure that retained evidence outputs from these simulations are considered first-class assurance artifacts, fully integrated into your audit trail and decision provenance system.
And this also requires explicitly designing for that hybrid reality. You have to validate that your continuous policies are enforced consistently across centralized data centers and local edge environments. The proof of resilience is in the replay.
So what does this all mean for the executive who started this deep dive thinking about a faster microchip?
The core takeaway is that autonomy is no longer a question of model capability. It is structurally an infrastructure and governance problem. We've moved past if we can automate risk and are now entirely focused on how reliably, repeatably, and provably can we run this continuous assurance layer.
And reliability in this context is entirely dependent on integrated policy management and verifiable provenance.
It is. As autonomy becomes hybrid running locally on a specialized chip or centrally in the data center, the necessity for a single integrated policy management framework that dictates execution boundaries and evidence requirements across the entire distributed estate becomes paramount.
And without that
policy integration, the speed offered by the new technology simply increases your exposure surface area exponentially. It forces a very hard governance choice.
Which leads to our final provocative thought for you, the listener. If your agents are running continuously, generating massive amounts of speed and action, but you can't replay their decisions or prove with audit-grade certainty what specific policy version and what sensitive context they use to make those choices, is that truly better than a quarterly spreadsheet?
What is the actual measurable cost of unverifiable speed in an autonomous enterprise?
If you found this executive brief valuable and you want to dive deeper into the economics and structural implications of these risk technology signals, including the full architectural implications of the agent control plane, you can access the latest research and subscribe to the premium version of the Risk Tech Journal. It's called the RTJ Bridge.
You can find it at rtj-bridge.com.
That's rtj-bridge.ie.com. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive.
That wraps up another episode of the Risk Wheelhouse. Thank you for spending time with us at Wheelhouse Advisors today. We hope you found the conversation insightful and actionable for your organization's risk strategies. Don't forget to subscribe on your favorite podcast platform, whether it's Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or Amazon Music. If you're looking for more in-depth analysis and thought leadership on risk technology, be sure to visit the Risk Tech Journal at therisktechjournal.com. It's your go-to source for comprehensive articles, expert interviews, and the latest trends shaping the industry. Subscribe today to stay informed. For any inquiries or feedback, please contact us directly at info@wheelhouseadvisors.com or feel free to connect with us on LinkedIn and x.com and share your thoughts or suggestions for future topics. Visit wheelhouseadvisors.com for more information and resources. Thanks again for joining us. Until next time, navigate wisely.